This is the Skoda Citigo-e, and it's really cute, isn't it? Now, it might look like a normal Skoda Citigo, but there's a clue in the name, E. It's all electric. That means they've ripped out the internal combustion engine and replaced it with an 82 horsepower electric motor and a 36.8 kilowatt hour lithium-ion battery pack.
This car replaces the normal petrol Citigo. That's right, going forward, the Citigo range will be all electric. But despite its fancy powertrain, this £17,000 electric hatchback looks pretty normal on the outside.
There are two things I love about the Citigo. The first thing is the size. It's tiny. It's just really refreshing to see a car this small. It's a great reminder that not everything has to be massive. The second thing is the general shape. It's not trying to be anything fancy like a sports car or a coupe or a crossover. It's literally just a box on wheels. And that's brilliant because boxes are the best shape for cars. Check this out. Now, one of the great things about it being a box is that it's really, really practical. This boot, although it's small, only 250 litres, gives you quite a lot of room for your weekly shop. And if you run out of space, you can also use the back seats to carry extra shopping. One of the reasons you might want to use that extra space on the back seats is because the car actually has a couple of charging cables for charging it up. First and foremost, there's your normal 3-pin charger, which you can use from any normal household outlet. And then you've got your Type 2 charger, which can plug into fast chargers or your wall box at home. I'll talk about more on charging in just a second. I want to focus on the practicality for a bit longer. And as you can see, this boxy shape, even though it's quite a small car, allows you a little bit of legroom and actually just about enough headroom. I'm 5'11", and I can fit quite happily back here. Apart from that, there's really not a lot in the back seat. There's no cup holders, there's no armrests. These door pockets are a complete joke. The windows don't actually open properly, they just pop out. I mean, okay, yep, there's a headrest, there's something. There's nothing in here, honestly. There's nothing, move on, there's nothing to talk about. There's actually a reasonable amount of space for 2 passengers. You'll never feel like you and someone you're riding with are kind of on top of each other. But again, there's not a lot going on in here. It's quite devoid of creature comforts. First thing I notice is that there aren't many vents. There's only a vent on the left and on the right. When I drive, especially in winter, I like to point one vent at my right hand on the steering wheel and the second vent on my left hand. And in here, there's only a vent on the right-hand side for me, which means I'm always going to be driving with one cold hand. Apart from that, the seats are actually quite comfortable. There's decent adjustment. They go forward and backwards. They actually raise up and down. And also the steering wheel adjusts for angle, so you can usually find a pretty decent driving position no matter how weirdly shaped you are. One final word on technology. There's not a lot of it in here. Again, it's put in a theme with this car. There is a tiny little display which shows you things like your radio and your media playback and also your phone connectivity, but it's very small and there's no built-in maps. There's no GPS integrated into the car. However, up here on the dashboard, you actually have a tiny little phone holder, which means you can use your phone as your GPS. Plus, the car actually comes with its own app to give you information about the car, your range, and other important information. Oh, one final thing, USB ports. I looked around for ages in this car for a USB port and couldn't find one. It turns out they've put the USB port behind the cradle on the dashboard. I can't quite work out if that is the most genius place for a USB port or the most ridiculous. Now, it might sound as if I've been a little bit mean towards the Citigo-e, but believe me, I'm actually a big fan of this car because where this car really shines is out on the open road. A big part of the reason why I'm such a big fan of it is because it's just really comfortable. It's a nice car to drive. So many cars have these pretentious sport seats. This thing just has normal chairs. It's such a refreshing change. Then you've got the driving position, which is perfect. So many cars have their steering wheels slightly offset to the left or to the right or angled slightly in one direction or another. This, dead center, it's an ergonomic dream. And then there's the quietness. Of course, electric cars are really quiet. That's their superpower. But this thing does it really well. It's so serene inside this cabin, so relaxing. It could be kicking off around you, but in here, you've got this bubble of tranquility. It's just really nice. As for the suspension, well, it's actually really good. There's great body control. It's not too hard, it's not too soft. it rides the undulations in the road nicely, and it even doesn't come a cropper on larger speed bumps. There are 3 driving modes in this car: Normal, Eco and Eco Plus. Normal gives you access to all the power and all the features that the car has, as you'd expect. Eco reduces the amount of throttle response, so you don't use the battery as aggressively if you have a heavy foot. And then Eco Plus goes a step further by limiting throttle response and also switching off your heating and air conditioning in order to maximize the battery. One really interesting thing though is that the car doesn't take away your heated seats when you're in Eco Plus. Some cars remove every bit of heating you get. I'm looking at you, Mini Electric, but this thing, no, it keeps your bum warm regardless. Generally speaking, there's not an awful lot to think about while driving this car, but there is one thing you can get involved in, and that is changing the amount of braking recuperation that the car has. So on the center stick, you can pull it back from D into the B mode, which actually takes the recuperation level up a notch. And that means that when you lift off the throttle, it actually slows the car down quite aggressively while it forces a little bit more charge back into the battery. That setup isn't quite aggressive enough to pull the car to a full stop when you lift off, so you can't quite drive this with one pedal, but that just means that in general it kind of feels much more like a normal car. As for the handling, do you know what? I wasn't expecting much from this car, but it's actually really good. It's a really fun thing to drive. The main thing for me is the low center of gravity. The batteries are located quite low down in the car, and that means that it's not very top heavy. So you can actually bung it into a corner at quite ludicrous speeds, and the Citigo-e just maintains its composure no matter what. Also, on these skinny little tires, you kind of expect them to be squealing and complaining everywhere they go, but not a bit of it. It maintains its cool almost no matter what you're doing. It's quite obvious, to me at least, that the guys who designed this thing didn't just want to make a boring economy box. They definitely have an interest in making cars fun to drive. It's definitely worth talking about the real world range in this car. I'm actually quite impressed by it. I have a commute from home to work of about 60 miles, so 120 miles return, and most of that is on the motorway. Electric cars hate the motorway, but I drove this car completely normally. I did 70 miles an hour on the motorway. I didn't slow down because it's an electric car, and by the end of it, I'd done the 120 miles, and the car was telling me that I still had another 20 miles to go, so it would have done about 140 motorway miles, which says to me that this car may be underreporting its range slightly, and that it might even be able to exceed, in the right conditions and in the right hands, the claimed range from the manufacturers. Having said that, what you're doing with the car and how you drive it will affect the range massively. So on a cold day, you'll get less range. If you drive it enthusiastically, you'll get less range. But to me, on the whole, this is a car that you can drive without worrying too much about whether you'll make it to or from your destination.
The Skoda Citigo-e comes with a choice of either slow charging or fast charging. The £17,500 SE version comes with a slow charger, but even that's not too bad. You can top it up in 4 hours 15 minutes using a normal 7 kilowatt wall box, the kind of thing that you get installed on the side of your house. The SEL version comes with a CCS fast charger, so you can fill the battery in an hour if you plug it into a charging point at a motorway service station, for example.
On the whole, I'm really impressed by the Citigo-e. I think it's just a really cool, honest, non-pretentious little car that does everything that it sets out to. Okay, so it's lacking in a few features here and there, but they're features that you don't actually need. And after driving this car, you learn to realize that all the extra superfluous stuff doesn't really matter. What really matters is whether the car's useful, whether it does what it's supposed to do, and whether it's fun to drive. And at the end of the day, the Citigo-e ticks all of the important boxes. Range, price, that's a big one. General fun factor, this is one of the best electric cars you can buy. I recommend it 100%.